So as our next speaker, I'd like to welcome Marco Palladino from Kong, one of the premier companies making API gateways, who's going to tell us how API gateways are playing the space. Marco?
Thank you, Guido. The journey of APIs is a journey driven by new, better ways to scale our business. And in this journey, either we evolve our organization or we fail. We are industry experts in this room with decisional power within our organizations. We all know that technology is changing very rapidly. We're moving from monolithic applications to more distributed, decoupled, microservice-oriented architectures. And among these technological trends that are changing not just our products, but the entire organization, either we evolve or we fail. My name is Marco Palladino. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Kong. Kong is a service management company that deals with APIs, deals with services and architectures across a variety of industries. To understand the journey of API management, we'll have to ask ourselves two questions. The first one, why are APIs changing in the first place? APIs are changing because our architectures are changing. Over the years, we transitioned from monolithic applications to more and more distributed systems. There were a few technological trends that triggered this transformation. For example, mobile is one of them. The traditional API management, as you know it, as we all know it, starts from the mobile days. We have a mobile app. How do we connect our mobile client with our monolith application? And as our software gets more and more complex, and as demand for our software also gets more complex, architectures evolves. And with architectures, APIs and the use case of APIs within those architectures also evolve. You're seeing that in 2013, 14, there is another big trend, microservices. Do you know why it happens around that time? Because Docker was born in 2013 and Kubernetes was built in 2014. Some organizations have moved away from monolith to microservices a long time before Docker and Kubernetes. But Docker and Kubernetes finally gave to everybody else the right tooling in place to start thinking about this transition, to start thinking about decoupling their legacy applications. And I know it's a very simple question, but then why are architectures changing? Let's take a step back, right? Why are architectures changing? Why are we moving away from certain systems, certain ways of building our software to other ways? And if we zoom out, we know that the answer to this is because we're trying to scale our business. That is the driver for architectures to change and for APIs to also change as well. Some organizations have done this transition, this change, to help their business. Think of Amazon. They moved from a place where they were selling books, and they had to go to a different place, a place where they could sell not just books, but everything else. In order to scale their business, they had to rethink their architecture. We all know what happens when that doesn't happen in the first place. Either we evolve or we die. The journey of API management, it's not just a journey across different architectures, different use cases. it's also a journey across organizational transformation. This is not just about technology. This is about our entire business. Transitioning from Monolith, for example, to microservices, it's not just a matter of using containers, using Kubernetes, or using XYZ. That's technology. That has to be part of it, but it's not the answer. Our entire organization has to evolve to scale the business on two parallel tracks. The technology has to evolve, and how our teams are working, how our teams are communicating with each other also has to work. For example, transitioning from Monolith to microservices makes us rethink how our teams are working together. We are transitioning away from bigger, larger teams to more small, decoupled teams. And how are these teams going to work together in that specific environment, now that we have so many moving parts? The journey of API management is a journey that allows you and helps us think of our business this way. Not just allowing us to help transitioning from a technology standpoint, but helping our entire organization getting a sense of it. There are three main industry trends that can help us understand the journey of API management. The first trend, data is in motion. Data used to be in specific pools handled by our monolith applications, but that's not the case anymore. As we keep decoupling our software, this information, all of these bits, have to travel from A to B to C and D, right? If data is in flight, now we do have a new challenge, right? Because if data is in flight, we have to deal with the network, which is unreliable. So what technology do we use to make something that's inherently unreliable, like the network, reliable again? The second trend is that our future is distributed. We have much more complex use cases for our software today than we had 10 years ago. Therefore, our software has to be able to adapt in order to handle these additional use cases and additional workloads. One way of doing this, it's distributing our software to make it more reliable. And that, at the same time, introduces new challenges, of course. And the third trend is that as we are making this transition, we will have to think about hybrid platforms. Our software is going to run everywhere. It's going to run in the cloud. It's going to run in containers. How do we build and what technology solutions do we choose to help us transition in this multi-platform world? Therefore, the journey of API management, it's also a journey of evolution. It's a journey that brings us to hybrid architectures and hybrid platforms. You know, the industry is very polarizing sometimes. Sometimes the industry tells us, you know, when you're transitioning to somewhere, either it's all microservices, or it's all serverless, or it's all monolithic. But we all know that that's not the pragmatic case. We, in our enterprise organizations, have to work with hybrid architectures. Sometimes because we don't have any other choice, you know. How many of you have monolith apps built who knows when by who knows who that are very hard to decouple? And so the journey is a journey across systems, different systems and different architectures, and how do we get a sense of all of them? From monolith to, like Gartner like to call them mini services, to microservices, to perhaps even serverless and functions as a service. API management, which used to be primarily at the edge of our organization, had to rethink how do we build business value at a higher layer above these technological trends, above these architectures. Who knows what else is going to happen 5 years from now? Our industry is changing so rapidly. Therefore, the value is going to be more and more in the control plane rather than the data plane. The data plane, being able to make our network reliable, fast, performant, secure. Eventually, we're going to have many players doing that right. Eventually, that will be commoditized. And most of the value that API management brings to the table, and API management, it's probably the wrong word. API management, perhaps it's more service management. The value it brings to the table is how can it create value at the business layer. At the end of the day, remember, this is about scaling our business. We're not making technological decisions for the sake of doing them. We're making them to scale our business and our organization. So how can API management bring business value above these technological trends that we're seeing today and above the ones that perhaps we don't even know they're going to happen in the future? This is the journey of API management. Layers above every specific trend. Hybrid architectures and hybrid platforms as well. We're not running our software in one cloud, in one system. It's going to be distributed across multiple platforms. So API management not only will have to take care of different architectures, but also being able to run on each one of these different platforms. It's an evolution story, in a way. Then there is a fourth trend that some of us are going through, which is blowing up the monolith. How do we transition away from that legacy into this new world of distributed, decoupled architectures? And API management can be an enabler to make this transition. The biggest problem in doing this is, how do we prevent our clients from experiencing any downtime? API management can be that abstraction layer that sits in between our clients, our apps, and enables this transition without causing downtime. Before being the CTO and co-founder of Kong, I was the co-founder of another company called Mashape. Mashape was an API marketplace. And around 2013, we felt like, we had a monolith, this large Java code base, and we felt like we were not being productive anymore. There are different strategies to blow up the monolith, and perhaps we have chosen at Mashape the wrong one. We decided to rewrite our entire monolith all at once into microservices. I call that the nuclear strategy, because it exploded along the way. We did not know what we did not know, and our transition took so much longer than we originally planned for. We eventually lose ground against the competition. A better way to do this would be to use what I like to call the ice cream scoop strategy. You have your large box of ice cream, that's your monolith, and you scoop out business logic that's hard to scale, that's damaging the business today, into smaller components. And they can get smaller and smaller over time if you need to scale them, if that's preventing your business from growing. Therefore, we end up with microservices. Lots of service-to-service communication that's exponentially increasing the complexity of our software in a way. Microservices, it's a great answer to certain scalability problems. It's also a complicated transition in a sense that microservices add some non-insignificant overhead on top of your infrastructure, and they really, really force you to rethink your organizational structure as well. It's not just decoupling your software, it's decoupling your teams. It has to happen simultaneously, or we're not going to be successful with this. And above this microservices trend, we're also seeing new technology, like service mesh, right? So the network is unreliable, the network is unsecure. How do we make that reliable and secure again? Ultimately, API management will have to give you the right platform to our teams to think about each one of these services as products. We cannot be successful with this if we don't think it that way. APIs, like any product, they must have a life cycle. We cannot allow our teams to create a microservice, destroy a microservice that way. There needs to be a life cycle. How do we publish a new microservice? How do we tell the other teams now that microservice is ready? How do we think about versioning, decommissioning, and killing some of these microservices? We need to have a life cycle. The journey of API management, it's the journey of a platform who wants to help you given that life cycle. Business value. Last but not least, service mesh is a pattern, right? It's not a technology. You do have many options around you that you can pick from, the best ones for your business. In a way, some of the feature set that service mesh and sidecar data planes, sidecar proxies offer within your architectures are things that traditional systems and middleware have been trying to do for a while. So the feature set, when you think about being able to make the network reliable, being able to version our APIs, implementing health checks in circuit breakers, you need that for north-south traffic and east-west traffic. But it's a new pattern, right? So how do we bring this feature set alongside our microservices in that specific east-west use case? I deal and talk with lots of industry experts in different enterprise verticals. And sometimes there is a very interesting question I get asked very often. They ask me, Marco, what is the difference between the SOA dream? You all remember the SOA dream, right? 2005, 2006, this dream of connecting services together. What's the difference between that, the SOA dream, and microservices? And the answer to this question, it's this. It's the ecosystem. It's the tooling. 10 years ago, we didn't have this ecosystem in place. We didn't have this tooling in place. And everything felt so much harder. Half of the logos you're seeing in these pictures did not exist 5 years ago. This is a brand new ecosystem that's finally giving us and everybody else the tooling to think about achieving that vision. And vision here is really the key word. When it comes to API management, when it comes to architectures, really, what is your vision? What are we executing upon? How is your business going to change in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now? And we should ask ourselves, are we investing enough time, energy today to make that vision successful down the road? Thank you.
A few questions. By the way, these microphones here are throwable. So if somebody has a question, raise your hand and you'll have a microphone thrown at you. And I mean this in the best possible way. If that feels unsafe, we also have a couple of microphones and stands here you can go to. Now everyone's intimidated here.
She plays soccer.
It was an Andrew Luck throw, if anybody knows what I'm talking about. Would have been a lucky catch, too. I don't remember what I was going to say. I want to talk to you about responsibilities in an organization, because you mentioned the fact that to evolve, we need to evolve the organization as well as evolve the technology. If we adopt a pattern that is kind of away from the mass shape ideal that you had, blowing up the monolith, where you end up with some workloads that are microservices, but some that are resembling the legacy that we left behind. Maybe not the entire monolith, but a fragment of it, the keystone of it, hanging around left behind, but still providing business value. Then who's responsible for the old and who's responsible for the new? Do we delegate those to different roles in an organization? Do we create different agile teams? You're the monolith team, you're the non-monolith team. How do we align roles and responsibilities with the abstractions that inevitably crop up when we decouple functions from roles?
Thank you for your question. It's actually a very important point. It's cultural. You're correct. We are going to end up perhaps in a transitional state where the old and the new have to coexist together. And perhaps that transitional state ends up being the correct state moving forward. We don't have to transition things if we don't have to, correct? From a cultural standpoint, I wouldn't create the idea of an old and a new. I would create the idea of one vision that everybody's on board with. The old team and the new team have to be part of the same unicum, have to be part of that same vision. Understanding what the roles are within that vision, that's a challenge that managers will have to communicate to those teams. But they have to be on board together in that same journey. The risks in not doing that is that you have half of the organization now that doesn't believe what they're doing anymore. And this is a risk too big to take for your business to allow that to happen. People have to be on board with that vision, and within that vision, it's like an orchestra. You have different roles in that same vision. Each one of those teams, even the ones that are working on the old monolith, are still part of the same orchestra, perhaps playing a different instrument, but still part of the same journey.
Following up on that, so let's say in the nature of higher education, sometimes you can't blow up the monolith, and sometimes there's not documentation on the legacy systems that are in place, and you end up having, service providers becoming complacent because they don't believe in the mission. They're unsure of how is their job affecting the entire school, and then you cut down on funding in higher education, and your IT staff is the first budget to get cut. How do you navigate that change? So say there's not documentation, and they're spending more time patch fixing their network, but the people who are trying to move to move progress forward, they don't understand what's in place and everything crumbles. What do you do then?
Whatever you do, there is one thing we should all remember, that failure must be cheap, right? The reason why when we did that transition at MassShape, eventually, I could say we failed, it was because it wasn't cheap. It was very expensive. Now, there are going to be challenges. There are going to be software and legacy software that perhaps is going to take a long time to get a sense of and decouple. Two things I would say about that. One is that whatever we do, we must make sure that failure is cheap, right? Getting those small wins along the road gives more confidence to the team that they can do it, and gives more confidence to the leadership that they can do it, right? It's not going to happen overnight.
No.
And the second thing is, we have to make a decision. What are we going to do with that legacy? The thing about legacy is that legacy never improves itself. Legacy has only two states: becoming more legacy or getting destroyed. That's how you get rid of legacy. Either you execute on it or you destroy it. If you leave it as it is, the state will not change, right? So perhaps one of the ways would be destroying it if you feel like that's a way, or evolving it over time, slowly. This is a great point, by the way, because the industry makes it seem like, we're transitioning to microservices, we're transitioning to new architectures, and it's going to be a good journey. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. It's not going to happen overnight. It's hard. It's not easy. It's harder.
Yeah.
And that is the expectation we'll have to set.
Thank you. That's a message that I would like to pass on to the CIO at my university. It's a conversation that he needs to have with you, but thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.